Dear colleagues, partners, and participants, I'm glad to welcome you all at today's discussion by Dixie Group about the summer season and a broader question of the role of decentralized energy. Please allow me, while the participants are still joining us, to mention several technical things. First thing, you will have simultaneous interpreting at this event from Ukrainian into English and from English to Ukrainian. So that's why if you need interpreting, please choose the respective language channel in the Zoom menu at the bottom. Also, the event is going to be recorded, so please take that into account, and all the materials will be sent to all the registered participants. As regards the questions that you might have to our speakers, please write them in the chat. We will also have a Q&A session where you can also ask your questions. Take into account the fact that there's going to be more than 100 people, participants today. So please keep your mics off. So for those who have just joined us, again, some technical details. Simultaneous interpreting is available. Choose the respective channel. The event is recorded. We will send the materials together with the recording later. And if you have any questions to the speakers, write them in the chat or keep them for the Q&A session that we're going to have after the panel discussion. We are conducting this conversation with the support of International Renaissance Foundation, and today, for us, it is important to talk not just about the current season, but also about the conclusions that Ukraine is supposed to make to prepare for the next winter, for infrastructure recovery and for the future architecture of the energy system. The summer period, for some reason, is considered as a period of lower loads compared with the autumn and winter, but in the current conditions, this logic is not working to the full extent. Because the summer season is a critical window to conduct the renovations, to accumulate resources, to recover facilities, to prepare the infrastructure, and to test the solutions that are supposed to provide resilience in the next autumn-winter period. That's why the experts of the analytical center Dixie Group prepared two outlooks: the summer outlook in the power sector and in the gas sector. These documents look at the situation of the power and gas system before the summer season. What are the key risks, the scenarios for the situation, the solutions that could reduce Ukraine's vulnerability? If we talk about the power, about electricity, so we got into the summer season after a very difficult winter season. We see the consequences of generating capacity and some network restrictions. We'll look at the factors such as renovations, import, and distributed generation growth. As regards the gas sector, the summer period is also crucial because we talk about storage of gas in the underground facilities to provide the respective resource for that, financing of these procurements also, and improvement and strengthening of the protection measures for gas extraction infrastructure. And another subject that we would like to talk about today, if we talk about the communities, the business, and the operators, this is decentralized energy. In the last years, it's become an entry basically to the destruction of the big energy structure that we had before the war, constant deficit, and the need for resilience in situ. That's why we have cogeneration facilities, photoelectric facilities with accumulators and other reserves boiler facilities, and other solutions that can be practically used for the hospitals, for water supply companies. It's already part of the new reality. But the question that we would like to consider today is whether this decentralized energy, whether this is just a set of anti-crisis solutions, or this is really a systematic element that they're going to be the foundation for the new power model in Ukraine. We understand that here we need not just technology, we need, of course, a set of regulatory measures, access to financing, market conditions, and capacity of the local actors, and a long-term vision for such measures. That's what we're going to be discussing today with business representatives, state companies, communities, experts in the legal experts and the field experts. We need to look at decentralized energy as the element of resilience and the market situation and technological challenge. So that's why before the beginning of the discussion, we will briefly present the key conclusions and then we'll have a moderated discussion. So it's my pleasure to give the floor to Mihailo Babichuk, key manager of Dixie Group in this area, to present the key conclusions. Mihailo, over to you. Thank you, Roman. Greetings, colleagues. As Roman has said, today I will briefly talk about the main conclusions of the outlooks, the summer outlooks on power and gas. The main idea of this presentation is very, very simple. Summer for this energy system is a critical window when preparedness for the next uh, period. We look at the summer not just at the season of lower consumption, but a period of renovations, accumulation of resources, recovery of damaged infrastructure, and new capacities. And of course, we need to check the system in terms of how it's ready to the new season. Next slide, please. Continue, Mihailo. So here we have key benchmarks and markers. In October 25, more than 9 gigawatts of generating capacity was damaged. In 2026, 1.5 gigawatts of new decentralized capacities will be introduced. For the gas sector, we have a specific target to accumulate 13.6 cubic meters of gas in the underground storage facilities before the beginning of the heating season. And the need for gas procurement is 6.5 to 7.5 billion cubic meters. Next slide, please. And in the meantime, yes. So separately, we need to also talk about the questions of flexibility of the energy system. The problem is not just the general capacity. The structure of this capacity is very important to cover for the peak load, to have reserves, to be manageable in the conditions of renovation or repairs of the damaged network. Nuclear energy remains the foundation for power sector. At the same time, the capacity is lower than the pre-war period, as we know, but in summer, some of the blocks of nuclear power plants traditionally are being maintained. The system lost a lot in the thermal power plant system and CHP. Here, it's very important because we talk not just about the production of electricity, but also about flexibility, balancing, heat supply for the cities. Also, we need to take into account the fact that hydropower is still limited and constrained, so this reduces balancing options during peak demands. Renewables, specifically solar energy, are a relatively stable segment, but they would not solve fully the problem of flexibility, especially in the evening and night hours. Distributed gas generation is expanding, but it is just partially compensating for loss of flexibility options. Next slide, please. So key data on power and three scenarios of going through the summer. The system has 2.45 gigawatts of capacity for commercial import of power in United Bloc, Ukraine and Moldova. Nuclear power plants in March provided more than 55% of the production of power of electricity. At the same time, in the summer, usually 2 to 3 NPPs units are going undergoing maintenance. That's why the estimation for nuclear power plant is about 4.5 to 5 gigawatts. In the first scenario, we think that there's going to be moderate summer with no new large-scale attacks. In this case, the peak demand could go all the way to 14.5 gigawatts. The deficit is possible, but up to 1 gigawatt in the hours when there's less generation. The loss of load probability up to 5%. If we look at the second scenario, this is heat wave with no new large-scale attacks. Here, peak demand increases to 15.8 gigawatts. Even with the import, the available capacity could be about 13.4 gigawatts, and the deficit during peak load hours up to 2.4 gigawatts. LOLP grows to 38%. And the last third scenario, the most difficult, new attacks plus extreme heat. Unfortunately, in this case, the deficit in the peak hours could reach 6.2 gigawatts. And during minimum workload, 4 gigawatts. Also, we can have loss of load probability up to 100%. And in peak hours, we can have up to 4 stages of scheduled outages simultaneously. So that's why the main conclusion here is that summer risks, they are the result of the heat maneuvering capacity and the risk of new attacks. Now, if we move over to the gas sector, the next slide, please. Thank you. So, gas resilience in summer, primarily it's the question of preparation for the next heating season. Here, an important thing is not just underground storage, but also the speed of pumping, uh, financing of procurement, safety of gas infrastructure, of course. We have three scenarios that we looked at. The basic scenario with no new critical attacks and with stable imports. The opening inventories is 5.1 billion cubic meters. Production in the period April to October is at the level of 10 to 10.5 billion cubic meters. Import 0.5 to 1 billion cubic meters. Consumption minus 5.5 to minus 6 cubic meters. Technical losses up to 0.5 billion cubic meters. Under such conditions, the injection to UGS could be up 10 to 10.5 billion cubic meters, which allows us to achieve the basic target for the storage. The second scenario, elevated wartime risk. Here, the main risk, of course, is that when production infrastructure and would be damaged. In this case, production reduces to 7.5 to 8.5, and the import demand needs grows to 3 to 4 cubic meters, billion cubic meters. Consumption is in the same level, 5.5 to 6. Technical loss is the same, 0.5. Injection to UGS could be 4.5 to 6. But to achieve the target level will depend more on the financing capacity, the availability of import, and the speed of recovery of damaged facilities. And the worst one, of course, is the third scenario, restricted imports and a price shock. Here, production is also assessed at the level of 7.5 to 8.5 cubic meters, but import then will be restricted to 1 to 1.5 billion cubic meters. Under such conditions, injection into UGS could be 2.5 to 3.5 billion cubic meters. That basically means that before the beginning of the heating season, Ukraine might be below the level of storage, and the situation will consequently depend significantly on the weather and other factors. There will be more volatility also. So in terms of the gas, the main conclusion is the resilience depends on what resource we can get in, we can inject into the storage facilities to defend production and to provide, of course, stability for the routes of supply. Overall, to sum up both of these outlooks, we can see the same logic in the power sector. Flexibility networks import are critical, maneuverable generation, and preparedness for the peaks. In the gas sector, it's about storage, import, and financing production and the speed of injection. In both cases, summer is the period when risks could still be somehow reduced. So to sum up, I would say that summer 2026 is kind of a test how well we can prepare for the next winter, and at the same time to reconsider the energy system so that it would be more flexible, local, sustainable, and less vulnerable to future threats. Thank you all for your attention. Thank you so much, Mihailo. Dear colleagues, I'd like to remind you, if you have any questions, you can send them into the chat, and we will also have a special Q&A session that we will have after the panel discussion. For moderation of the panel discussion, I would like to invite Olan Pavlenko, President of Dixie Group, who will also present the participants. Thank you so much, Roman. Thank you so much, colleagues. And thank you all who joined today's discussion. We have 193 participants online. On site, it would be difficult to get so many people. So thank you so much for your attention to our work. Once again, this is assessments of Dixie Group or by Dixie Group. That's where we invited a panel of speakers that will be able to comment on our assessment, to present their assessment, and also to present and to assess what's gonna happen with the energy system this summer and also in the autumn with an outlook towards winter. We have a huge panel of speakers, so I would kindly ask you for brief comments. The first person we have, let me invite me to invite him, Mr. Dmytro Sakharuk, the trading, the tech. Thank you for being with us and thank you for your readiness to participate. So, Mr. Dmytro, recently you said that the change of approaches to pricing as one of the factors or what we need to increase investments into energy. My question is, are there any specific factors that are critical specifically to stimulate the decentralized generation? And what business needs from the government and from the local authorities primarily to speed up the decentralized generation? Yes, good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you so much, Elena, for your invitation. And it was a pleasure to look at the report. I can say that overall, the figures and the forecasts, they are in line with ours. I will comment maybe on some possible specific features that we are seeing. But overall, it is a correct assessment of the situation. As regards the regulatory conditions for the country to develop distributed generation. So I think that here, in addition to the price signals, we also need to add some more of those. I will start with
Let me start from the market pricing. I think this is the main reason why people are investing into the maneuver generation or the balancing generation, because the whole business model is built on the presumption that you can earn when the price is high. when in most of all the electricity is needed, like for instance during the peak consumption hours. This could be in the evening or in the morning, but you're ready to work only when they pay a lot. That's the basic load. We're not talking about the basic load. That's why the price caps have to give the opportunity to earn when the system requires this maneuvered generation. I think our situation has become better after the review of NERC for the price caps of 15,000 hryvnia. In case we look at it, what the market participants said about it, that the main argument was exactly the increase of the price caps in order to provide the operation of the gas generation that should be able to cover the peak loads. That is very important, and we now have made a great step in this direction. I think this level shall be sufficient for the time being to go through this winter, meaning the next one, 26-27. But the price caps, I think they are not enough, because the next big spot of this equation is the balancing market. So there is a question of the payment for the electricity that was produced with the maneuvered generation. So you can have a great income on paper, but it won't come any better from the money. So BEPLUS, the balancing market, it doesn't pay on time. The average term for the delay is more than 1 year. That's why it turns out that the one who was ready, the one who was even had an opportunity to work and worked and on paper earned income, they won't be able to get money in order to pay for the gas or to pay for the employees or for the service of their capacities. That's why stabilization of the system and stopping accumulating debts on the balancing market is the second very important direction area where we would be again be able to talk about the confident engagement of the balance of the maneuvered generation. I think a lot is to be done in the upcoming, must be done by the government in the coming 1, 2, 3, 5, 6 months to level out the situation in the balancing market. What we have at the moment, the situation is quite bad because the level of debts is very high. We're talking about billions hryvnias, and unfortunately, this debt increases from month to month. So I think one of such, let's say, sources of this money for the balancing market could be the cancellation of this overall PSO in electric energy and in gas, because these are relatively close markets. It's when everybody receives this benefit for the price of electricity. So it seems to me that we should move to these targeted dotations. Everything is available in the country for this. DIA is available. If we can distribute dotations in other businesses, definitely we can provide people with the dotations for power. What will that do? This will free up some liquidity on the market. There will be a lesser amount of Energoatom or Ukrenergo that goes for financing of low prices. So secondly, there will be simply more money, including on the balancing market, so we could settle for the electric energy that has been worked on. Number 3 or number 4, that's long-term contracts and the mechanisms, capacity market, the so-called, when NERC has already started to these long-term contracts to build batteries. We are now discussing contracts to build gas generations. So the payment for the readiness to work, that's the European practice that has to be in the portfolio of our state. That is, in essence, the stimulation of this generation that will be ready to work when they have to be there. And for this readiness, the state will pay. But once again, it's important to provide with money the recipient of this contract, that's Ukrenergo, that should have the capacity to pay for this readiness. And also some other important things, that's access to networks, to grids. Much has been done already, the possibility to be connected to grids, but smart availability, smart accessibility is not like built where you want, but really where this actually be can be accepted, and the smart investment policy has to have place. The next issue is providing the adequate level of payments, because it's no secret there are lots of consumers who are simply not paying. They are placed in such a way that they are not even switched off, and the level of commercial losses at the market, it actually goes beyond any normal limits. So you have to find a good balance and to switch them off, and have the discipline to switch off such consumers everywhere. In case we talk about the last element of the regulatory policy to stimulate new construction, it's of course the question aimed at the military insurance of military risks, war risks. It's no secret that the gas generation or the batteries that were built, they were already damaged or even fully destroyed after the production. There were some examples already of some gas generation that were destroyed in the territory of Dnipropetrovsk, Zaporizhia, Kharkiv Oblast. So in order to engage investment into this sector, especially when this is absolutely necessary during winter in these frontline territories, because there will be the biggest number of shells, then of course without the insurance, to talk about a significant build up of the distributed generation, it's difficult to say, because you can easily lose the money. So this is like the general palette of the solutions that need to be taken into account, that need to be worked on in order to provide a more sustainable regulatory environment for the further development of the distributed generation in the country. Thank you so much, Dmitro. I can only say that it coincides that we have fixed for ourselves stabilization of the system, stopping accumulation of debt, canceling the general PSO, capacity market, smart accessibility to grids, adequate level of payments, and that's what we call the war risks, insurance of the war-related risks. Thank you so much for such a good overview and for such a good list. Once again, it sounds like a systemic list of jobs for our regulator and the government. My next question is to Mykola Kolesnik, the head of the generation of Naftogaz Ukraine. Mr. Mykola, it's no secret that Ukraine is trying as much as possible to rely on gas and on gas-related solutions, because this is a possibility to increase the resilience of communities, Kommunenergo, hospitals, critical infrastructure. That's something that saves us in the condition of the massive shelling. But the question is whether it's going to strengthen our dependence on gas in the future, and if Ukraine has undertaken the obligations on decarbonization. So how can we as Ukraine, how we can align our potential increase of the gas or not with the decarbonization plans? Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. Natural gas, I will try to be really quick and structured. In the first place, natural gas was defined by the European Commission as the transitional type of fuel. So we understand until 2050, this generating capacity on natural gas will have the basis of the so-called market payment for the capacity market, where we are already moving in the framework of the market conflict mechanisms. So the mechanism when the available capacity, quick one that meets the criteria of classes B and C, that is the relevant gas turbine and gas piston units that can respond to the needs to support the energy systems in part of the regulating the frequency in terms of the available capacity. That is the question of the security of supplies directly that is present nowadays, not only in Ukraine. So we can see in the neighboring countries of the European Union, there is a huge percentage of regions where there is the development of the renewable sources of power. One of the examples in Germany is Lublin region, where in the 1990s they cancelled nuclear power stations and they built instead a significant number of wind onshore and offshore generation, and in separate hours they have a significant profit and deficits. And the question is how to cover this difference of system balancing, either with imports, which impacts the neighboring markets, or gas generation. So we are confident from the available solutions, gas generation is a sustainable solution. Whether it can affect the availability of gas, according to the estimation of the natural gas in the world, there are enough that can be enough for consumption. But the question of the availability of this natural gas, we can see that Europe is developing by LNG terminals. We are developing our gas transportation system, the underground storage of the United Gas transportation system in order to develop new routes, receiving the gas logistics between European countries. Basically, we have the direct integration. That's why in the future there is a simple competition of molecules. Sometimes the cost of LNG in some periods can compete with the gas of the internal production, with the effectiveness of producing locally the gas. But in this, the market shall have the liquidity. The liquidity, as the previous speaker said, when all subjects are paying for the goods, when the goods are sold using the market price. And in case the business model we can put in for the factors of resilience on the real market indicators, then this business model will be truly resilient, sustainable, and that depreciation period that is put into the equipment, that is the number of hours that will really work, and this is the most important stimulus. Why? Because a lot of gas generation in the last decade, in case we analyze, in the last 10 years in Europe, they were built as a backup capacity. And in some periods, when the price instability was there, it simply stopped. So without a separate support, this gas generation didn't work. That is a very important conclusion, which we, during the development of this segment, shall take into account and to understand that the role of such generation is possible when it's business who builds to support own manufacturing process for the absence of putting on hold the production. It's also the consumer cluster. We now get that we whole subclass of the active consumer, and the number of active consumers who have the combined technical solutions, being it solar panels, energy accumulation systems, gas generators, some other solutions depending on the type of consumer, it's quite high. So we will come to this, that the activity of the Ukrainian consumer is very high, and the provision of electric energy that we will be managing. The key question will be how to manage these prosumers. They can potentially unite in the so-called energy communities, energy cooperatives, and exactly the energy system itself will always work under the principle of the united energy system, but such energy communities, they will have even a bigger role. And that is really a true decentralization. Also, when we say decentralization, it should also take place in heat, because today the significant number of cities are using district heating, centralized. It is vulnerable. This is not a simple technical solution for the multi-million settlements, but we have to move into that area to create zoning, to create separate sources of supplies, and for this we have to create a market. When we have the good unbundling in heat, in terms of the services of transit of heat, then there will be the market of the so-called the alternative producer, be it biomass or something else. And we can see that the Baltic countries have gone through this way, and they have the diversified options, diversified models, even the system of storage, heat storages that can work depending on the price situation. It's very important for us because in the framework of the Naftogaz group portfolio, there are a number of important places with decentralized systems of heat that we are responsible, heat generation, heat and power plants. It's also about the number of the boiler houses. It's really resolving the question of heat supply in individual heat points whenever we have a huge housing capacity. What is also strategically important, we see that Ukraine is joining the energy market of the Eastern Europe. Therefore, the capacity will be sold at these united energy platforms. In case we analyze the neighboring markets, we can see that even in Romania, there is 1.5, 2 gigawatt share that will be decommissioned in the nearest time of the coal generation, lignite, and that's the manured generation. That is the generation that will be required, and that's why we have to, with the market coupling, we will have the internal market as well as the market that impacts the stability of our energy system. So this balancing capacity, it will work in the regional segment. Biomethane, that's one of the components that is also positively impacts the decarbonization, this certain energy gas mix, but in general, I would want to mention that those available technologies of the producers of the equipment, Wärtsilä, Bergen, Mitsubishi, GM Vernona, they already include the capability in the existing units to make dual fuel gas plus with the calculation of the impact of the development of the future technologies. We understand that the period of usage of such machine is 10, 15 years, and there could be various tendencies, both from the price as well as from the technological point of view. So we have to take into account this factor. So to summarize today, I would like to say that we have the market where the conditions of the implementation of the projects are quite simplified. The only thing that is necessary is the price stability on the real market conditions. That's where we have the full-scale liquid market, financially healthy, and that is the main reason for any investor. That is the guarantee that their money will return. Thank you, Mr. McCullough. From the first two performances, we clearly hear that the market conditions, that is exactly one of the conditions of the further stability and the security in case we want to strengthen the resilience of our system. But again, talking about prosumers, talking about the further decentralization, talking about the system of systems, as the minister says, the Minister of Energy says, I would like to pass the floor to Sergei Shakalov, the CEO and the co-founder, co-owner of SES Group. Sergei, welcome. From the technological point of view, we're already saying a lot about installation of solar energies, about accumulators, hybrid solutions. There is the attempt to make smart net grids. There are also some local communities attempts. The question is about scaling up. How ready is Ukraine to scale up these new approaches, the new initiatives? What is necessary to make sure we could make this scale up quickly and effectively for the recovery and for the resilience? Good afternoon. Thank you so much for the invitation. Let me take not too much time in terms of what is ready from this technological side in terms of the scaling up. From the point of view of the generation, solar stations, they're built up. That is already a very, very simple product, very simple products that could be built in quite quickly in many places, both for their own usage, this as well as elsewhere. From the point of view of the wind station, that is a more difficult issue. Yes, Ukraine has already a great experience of building up wind stations, but it takes longer, and correspondingly you have to pay more attention, which exactly period, what is our horizon for planning. In case we go back to the planning of horizon, like until the next heating season, which is bad because that's a very short timeline. And correspondingly, it's difficult to forecast the long activity in case we have this short state horizon of planning. Nevertheless, I can say that everything that is going to be built up until the next heating season, that is already a clear story. But unfortunately, it's not yet known. That is, we have now a certain it seems to me we have a poorly managed process when everybody is building everything anywhere and without some long-term strategy and prospects. And it seems to me that this is one of the biggest problems.
And this is one of the biggest problems. Currently, there's a lot of solar power facilities that are built, a little bit less wind, now battery and energy storage, which is a mainstream, small gas generation. From the viewpoint of smart grids, this story, it already makes sense. We can do that. But unfortunately, I think Ukraine is not yet ready to scale up this to a large extent. Here we have like these bottlenecks, yes? And I would define three of them. The first bottleneck is lack of awareness of the companies what smart grid is, how it works. And consequently, at a certain point in time, from the customers, it's needed just for them to sort of grasp the idea, to understand the idea as such. The second problem is a very small number in Ukraine of high quality operators who could operate with smart grids and decentralized generation if we take it like more broadly. And the third that I have already probably mentioned partially is the question of lack of understandable strategy, long-term strategy. Because when we are building everything everywhere, anywhere, and anyone is building that, so consequently, the winter will pass and we will receive something once the winter comes. And this something, which is going to be incomprehensible and not understandable how it's going to look, we will need to operate with this somehow. And we might get a certain situation when a lot of generation, which was already there, it's going to be not needed anymore. So in the market conditions, it's going to be not competitive. And this risk is really there. And the companies that are now in charge of construction and creation of energy facilities, they should take that into account. But the answer of this question comes from the long-term state strategy, where we finally need to get, basically. As of now, the liberalization of regulatory conditions, it is coming close to this resilience limit. Yes, regulatory, we are simplifying everything, and all of these initiatives, they're really, really useful. They, with them, we can have networks with higher quality load and to more quickly build new generation or these micro networks if there's capacity for that. But again, the problem is that we might get a certain chaos after the autumn winter period. Even coming back to your presentation is a forecast for the summer, but not a forecast for the winter. So what scenarios are we going to have in the heating season? Which scenarios are being considered by the government? From what I know from personal conversations, currently the state policy really looks very, very short term. So basically, just until the heating season. And there's two things here. The state, the government invests into the critical infrastructure. Business have should deal with the energy themselves, and the government gives some tools for that. And this is also a tool for creating a certain situation in the spring of 2027. What do we have now, and how do we manage all of this? This is my main message in that regard, that we need to come back to a more manageable story and about increasing quality operators of the centralized generation, decentralized energy. It's not a question of the nearest 6 months. It's the question of a long-term development, and there's also a certain significant restriction for scaling up. And of course, the installers, yes, they are all overloaded, all of them. So everything that could be built before the heating season, it's already clear, but we need to calculate that. Unfortunately, this information is not available to us, at least. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Serhi. Thank you for your comment. We now added to the discussion this element that in addition to building up decentralized generation, we also need somehow to structure it, to seed. Yes, the government needs to understand how to manage it and or at least how understand how to work with it. Yes, at least there should be a clear understanding of that because we are talking about the energy sector, and this is a very important thing in this regard. Thank you so much. Please allow me to finish the first part of this because we have questions in the chat. Okay, colleagues, if you have questions to Mr. Dmytro, Mr. McCall, so please write them in the chat. I will now have a round of questions and then we will have the next speakers. So, question to Mr. Dmytro. How does the market of bilateral agreement work in the current conditions? What about the long-term contracts in this lack of predictability? And do these factors have an impact on the financial stability? And also, Metro, if you would like to comment somehow, also the question of the questions of the presentations of other panelists, over to you. We don't have the bilateral agreements market, especially long term. Everything is in the spot. So these are basically contracts that are concluded for a decade, 10 days, yes, maximum 1 month. So this is the tradition that started from since 2019 when the consumers, when they understood that there are price caps in the country, they were never afraid of high prices. And basically they could afford very easily to conclude agreements, short-term contracts, because they knew that the price is going to be either price cap or lower. And there was no incentive to have long-term contracts. And unlike the situation in European countries where the consumer knows that spot is always more expensive than the long-term contract, with us it's different. Spot is always cheaper than the long term because we had a low price cap. So that's why we did not have this culture of long-term contracts. It was for this reason, and the war added risks that are connected um, with power cuts and missile strikes or drone strikes, and the consumers never switched to long-term contracts. There's no culture of having long-term commitments. Nobody wants to sign contracts for a year, for 2 years, even if they get a little bit better price, because everybody is just living, this day in the spot, yes? And this is a specific feature of the Ukrainian market, which unfortunately narrows down the financing capacity and options because a lot of financial institutions would like to have a clear understanding that if somebody builds something, then they have a long-term product contract, for 5 years in Europe. for example, be trading that we have in 25 European countries, Central and Eastern Europe. If 3 years ago PPA we started for 3 years or 2 years, it was a norm. Now they do it PPA for 7 years. Of course, for that we need to have infrastructure for hedging risks, because no trader is going to take upon themselves the exposure to the risks without understanding how this could be done. We need to have a liquid market that would basically work with that. For example, if you have PPA in Romania, then you hedge this contract in Hungary or in Germany. There's a certain correlation. Unfortunately, here Ukrainian market lives their life. Our zone is very different. Different again. The war factor, regulatory limitations. That's why correlation between the Ukrainian and European market of the liquid market is there's none basically, and it reduces the capacity to have long-term contracts because no trader could take such a risk on themselves, even if they wanted that. So that's why we have this story that producers would like to have long-term contracts, but consumers don't want that because they know that spot is going to be cheaper and they're not afraid of a high price. And traders are not taking commitments, long-term commitments, because there's no option to hedge it because the market is non-liquid and the closest market does not correlate sufficiently with the Ukrainian market to take this risk. Thank you so much, Dmytro. Mykola, I know that you're going to need to leave soon, so a short question to you. So, Dmytro, if you could look into the chat because there's more questions coming up, so I may not be able to ask everybody. So, Mr. Mykola, a question to you. Mr. Sahi talked about the need to have sufficient. He said operators, I would say market participants. Yes, professional market participants on decentralized markets. So my question, Naftogaz, does Naftogaz see such partners, sufficient number of such partners they could work with in the gas sector and keep developing decentralized generation also in the gas, or there are some additional needs? And Sahi, the question to you later, it's in the chat. So Mr. McCullough, over to you. Are there additional needs for gas? No. Are you satisfied with the number and the quantity and the quality of the partners to keep developing decentralized generation, including gas? I mean that the number of companies that work, the speed of the quality of the work, the traders, are there enough if we talk about infrastructure of the companies? As of today, I am con I would say that we are just at the beginning of this market. We are at the process when the first proper generation facilities are being launched. We are mostly working in terms of generation that is just a backup. These are small container solutions. Currently, the country went through this path. The main number of producers, they are basically the drivers that had received more generations. These are really simple technical solutions. Europe is living with more efficient solutions. This is combined CCGT, combined gas cycle with the steam cycles with high efficiency. So we will get to these a little bit later. The question is about the security, or these are quite big facilities that are difficult to protect in Ukraine's conditions currently. At the same time, we're seeing that internationally there's now a trend to construct data hubs, and consumption or the demand towards the main producers of equipment has become more active now, and the producers that used to give 8 to 12 months commitment to supply now takes several years. So basically, we have to have a high quality planning of our demands, and this is the position of most of the producers. A second part, equally important, is the service, day-to-day service or maintenance of this equipment. And here we need to mention that in Ukraine, basically neither Siemens nor other producers, they never had the branch. So the only option to set up the process properly is to have international experts certified by these producers that would later set up the work of the system, like management system, this generation. And some of them have requirements regarding remote control of these facilities. So this is what we still have to get to, and this expertise is being shaped. For example, in our group, we have equipment from several producers, and we this is our strategy to have our own service, and we are now training these people and certifying them because otherwise we cannot have the day-to-day service of these facilities. The third and equally important, when you already have a certain number of pieces of equipment to reduce operational costs, you have to have some equipment that is systematic, that is needed for the work of this equipment, and this is specific oil, for example, or if it's pumps, some components of these pumps. So some kind of actual equipment that is needed for maintenance or servicing of this equipment. If producers do not provide this the content of that, so this is going to be paid by the consumer, Ukrainian consumer. And number four, in big transnational corporations, Ukraine used to be Caspian or East region, and our service centers, for example, they were mostly in Dubai. So basically, in the Persian Gulf countries. Currently, we get to the point that our need is increasing. We are already appearing on the map of the international producers, so it should be our request of the Ukrainian consumer for the service to be provided so that they would have the respective work in the regions and they would provide for the proper services. Thank you so much, Mr. McCullough. Mr. Srihi, question also to you. Here, there's a request for you to continue to follow up on your proposal to the government and to suggest maybe you have some vision how to structure this distributed generation or some main framework for this kind of structuring. It's the question of perspective, of course. This is a question of perspective. If we talk about the shortest perspective possible, which is winter 26, 27. Yes, we are now working for certain initiatives with the Ministry of Energy regarding the aggregation of small generators that have already been shipped to Ukraine to make them not as backup, but to make them part of the energy system. If we are successful, we could receive some generation, maneuverable generation, that could be part of the energy system. But how much I can tell you, because I don't have the data, how much in Ukraine we have generation that is just basically on hold now, that is not working now. Yeah, well, I'm talking about almost each enterprise has some generator 50, 100, 150 or 200 kilowatts, and it's not known. Yes. And all of these elements, they could be a part of the energy system, actually. They could work in synchrony with the energy system. Yes, for that, we need to have to do certain things, at least prepare them technically. And also, what we also need is some kind of operation. So, high quality aggregation groups that could work with that. That's about the shortest term perspective. If we talk about a longer term perspective, so in that regard, we basically get to two questions. What do we want as a country, basically, what we want to build, and what will we have in the spring of 2027? So, if we need to understand basically we need to understand our battlefield. basically, so to speak. What do we have as such? What is actually working? What is not working? And so we need to take that as foundation to move forward. But the main factor, this is what we definitely not going to avoid or to prevent. This is basically, for example, construction of solar power plants for our own consumption.
That is something that you can't manage because the cost of the distribution and the transmission is such that gives the payback for the solar station for own usage very short term. I don't want to give you an exact figure, but that's like 1, 2 years at max. Correspondingly, that is really profitable. That is really makes sense to install. But that leads to the fact that the amount of energy that moves into the grids is decreasing, which is leading to the increase of the tariff. That in turn increases the motivation of the entrepreneurs to install even more. And we are entering this death circle that Oblanaga has to change its capacity, its essence, and how they will change it. That is the question already of many possible scenarios. But this whole generation, it will maybe not balanced. So we need the balancing capacity for the solar, this battery storages, and this we could actually describe the structure of the summer period. What to do in winter, it's a different approach because the sun doesn't generate that much in the winter. So we have to understand what we will get in the spring of 2027 and try to build on it already some forecasts. We need to have this battlefield map. It doesn't exist. Maybe it does exist, but unfortunately it's not known to me because they bring it all. They are building anywhere and anyhow, both as the reserve power supplies, standalone solutions, the hybrid systems, and many of the wind development, the cogeneration units who are installed for the generation of just electric energy, as well as for the generation of electric energy, as well as the heat. And that all needs to be somehow united, put it all together to calculate it, and then to understand what we are having now. And possibly from this, we have to start off to formulate certain forecasts and scenarios. I really hope I could answer this question. Thank you so much, dear colleagues. I don't even have the capacity to describe it all because there were so many specific solutions mentioned and such a clear list what needs to be done. I will simply try to say very generally to describe what we have been talking about right now in the first place. That is about what I'm hearing, quite a big to-do list for our regulator in order to make the order on the market a little bit, at least to level out the problems with the prices, to resolve the problems with the debts, and to provide the adequate, smart, additional capacity. But once again, this capacity, it's what Sergey is saying, can't be built chaotically. Somewhere there has to be, I will quote, this battlefield map along which the state has to understand how to live in the summer, how to live in the winter, and adding up some ideas that Mikola was mentioning. In any case, Ukraine, in this total balance of its generation, will have the gas. In any case, it will remain. It won't go anywhere. More than that, its role will be strengthened while we continue to integrate our markets with the markets of the European Union, for at least for the period when we call about the transition period to the scenarios of the full decarbonization. But as one of the elements of this continuation of the usage of gas, we need to build our further capacity with the work, with the new equipment, with the new solutions, also using gas. I was trying to be very careful, trying to describe what we have been talking with our distinguished speakers in the first part of the panel. Now we will be having more questions in case somebody can look into the chat and can put it into writing. I would appreciate that. Then I will repeat them in the second, in the end. I will now move to the second part of the panel. We also have great speakers. Olga Savchenko, the Senior Program of IT Law in Sempra. That's the first speaker of the second part. Is Olga, the new legislation that has been approved very recently, can it really help to pave the way for scaling up distributed generation? Sergei said we have quite good conditions from the regulatory point of view to make sure we would implement it, that we would deploy it. Would you agree? What else can be improved? What can our legislation say about it? Thank you so much, Ms. Olena. Thank you so much, first of all, for this very interesting discussion that is already taking place. Thanks for the great work done with this report. Really, really very interesting and absolutely resonates. I think the colleagues also said that everybody more or less feels the same on the market, and maybe somewhere in the framework of this story about the new legislation, maybe I can also shed some more light. Maybe I will highlight on something. Our basic law that was put for the development of the decentralized generation and recovery generation, this the law was 4777. It was meant as the law to change the regulation on auctions, the so-called green auctions. On lots of questions, it has already regulated a lot of questions related to the decentralized electric energy. Important to mention that deregulation is a lot. The law is mostly positive. This law is a response to the proposals of the market that were arriving, the response to the market needs, put it more correctly. And here immediately we have a problem. And what I believe as a lawyer, what needs to be additional worked on. Of course, this is difficult, but nevertheless, taking into account that we are in the conditions of the war, in the conditions of the acute need of private investments into the energy area, we have to be quicker. So the law has appeared on the 5th year of the war. It has to be quicker, same as we would need in a quicker pace. The secondary legislative base for such legislative acts that are adopted for the development of the energy system. So this is number one. Number two, it's about those provisions that are regulated in the law. First of all, it's auctions. First of all, we extended the term of their provision until 35. The entrance threshold was reduced to enter the auctions. We regulated the question of technical discrepancies about the already built up objects. The term of facilities of the objects has been extended with the good price cap of 12 euro cents. So lots of positive changes, and most importantly, same as before, basically the work under this auction mechanism would be under the principle of the contract for a unit. Now it will be working with the net market premium. Great changes, what the market wanted. We gave it to them. We're now expecting the changes into the order running auctions. It has already been announced, and there is a great work behind this, that the quote for the auction that will be taking place this year, that is like 1 gigawatt. So we basically see the interest to these auctions and the field in order to really play around that, take into account this quota. Nevertheless, and that's where I can confirm what the colleagues have said, the main problem of the auction model of the support is that the counterparty based on this model is the guaranteed buyer. There is the joke on the market that the guaranteed buyer, but not guaranteed payer. I'm always smiling and laughing about it, but that's laughing through tears. This is the problem. We don't have the institutional trust of the European investors. European investment institutions don't accept this mechanism a priori because the guaranteed buyer has huge, crazy debts for 2023 that have different volumes, but they're available for other war years, and the resolution of this problem at the moment simply is not available. The Ukrainian banks, to the extent known to me, they will be going ahead, taking into account that this is the state support mechanism. But in any case, this is again the risk that this counterpart as this guaranteed buyer, it's a risk. So we are coming to this, that these decisions that have to be done on an institutional level, well thought through, but quick in terms of the market of debts in Ukraine. They are necessary already yesterday. The law has regulated the question of the guarantees of origin and the possibility of their recognition. Very often, this instrument remains behind the scenes because it has not officially worked in Ukraine, although there were some hopes about it. Nevertheless, it seems to me that it would be really great in case the recognition could take faster. This could contribute at some point in time the experts of our electric energy at a high price, and possibly to make sure that this mechanism would work, it would be necessary to go back to something that the ecological taxes that we have within our international obligations and our obligations related to the European accession process, they are not sufficient, and that's where we could use the mechanism of guarantees of origin. Olga, one more minute. One more minute, please. Yeah. One other novelty is this flexible connection, basically using the capacity to connect that they have in the substations, and then with the change of growing up, the capacity actively developing the bylaws. Nevertheless, in terms of connecting to grids, we are always facing the situation that each housing association are different, there are different approaches. And when you get to the technical conditions in practice, you understand that we need a bigger control and a bigger, better mechanisms of punishment and the responsibility for the non-fulfillment of the obligations of high quality. It's important to have this connection from everybody to everybody. So there could be the usage of various types of generation that they can be configured. That's exactly the opportunity to use free capacity that is available from the consumers. In here, there is this gap that would need to be worked on. As far as I'm concerned, that's SES plus UZE. Now the producer can add this UZE. UZE can add the producer, and UZE that was added to the consumer, to the producer, they now have the right for the dispersation as it used to be before for the operator of UZE. UZE should not go away from the network without receiving the proper technical conditions when they're added. Thank you so much. And now, really 20 seconds to complete. And exactly, I would want to finish at this. This is the problem because we really have lots of solar stations that need to be balanced. Most likely, the stimulation of energy storage should be simulation of energy storage should be increased, and that's where we have the space to work it and to have the possibility to charge from the grid, and maybe also including some bilateral agreements for gas generation with the availability of price caps, what my colleague said, and the regulation of this sphere. You can't say that this is going to stimulate the development of this decentralized gas generation near the consumer that can make this bilateral contract. Super, thank you so much, Olga. And now, if possible, I will pass the floor to the representative of the local authority, Anton Orechov, first deputy mayor of Zlatopil City Council. Mr. Anton, we heard a lot. The business, we heard the representatives of Naftogaz, private business, we heard the lawyers, we discussed the regulatory issues, we discussed the questions of the price. Could you, from the point of view of the municipality of the city Hromada, could you say what basically is of most concern, the biggest problem for you to work with the decentralized generation? I will give you several problems that I know. Please, could you range them? But I would be happy just 4 or 5 minutes. First of all, to find financing. Number two is to prepare the technical solutions, saying that we already have said about the necessity to do the services, to go through the procedures, to find the contractor, and to provide for the further maintenance if there are any problems on the side of the consumer. Colleagues, thank you so much for this very resourceful discussion. From our end, from the Chromadas, it looks somewhat different than how it looks from the side of the market, because we are focusing on getting the profit. So the main objective for the number of so it's for the business, it's profit. For us, it's provision of services. So in terms of the general project in general, this all depends on the project as such. This could be the sun, or it could be something else, some project with the support of the investors. Then the participation is, the engagement is reduced. So it's very important to have the high quality working through the technical conditions for the development of the options. When it comes to our cogeneration units that we received 1.5 years ago, and we had also hope to also catch up 25-26 when we talk about the projects related to grid connections. As it turned out, it's not that difficult to find the financing, rather than go through all the procedures and all of these circles of hell. And that is a big problem. Exactly, that never went away. 1 year ago, at the state level, Anton, if you could move closer the microphone, because we have the back noise and we can hear really badly. Is it better now? Not really. Is it better? Yes, it is better. Yes, we can continue. I would appreciate for just 3 minutes. So our experience says that any declarations at the central level, they stop very often somewhere in a office of some very specific professional from Oblgas who thinks differently. Our partners were very much surprised when we were forced, receiving the technical conditions, we were forced to build new boiler houses on the basis of the cogeneration units, because instead of coming and installing and just to connecting them and to using them, we are building, in essence, new facilities. That was really the main stoppage for the implementation of these initiatives, and any international partners and any international support is stopping right here. Same as in many other Chromadas, and I know that exactly on this level, they are breaking this process. And in reality, we are forced to go through very, very, very difficult procedures of endorsement, losing time, although things are so critical and there are other conditions that we are trying to provide the sustainability for the work of the critical infrastructure. That's why in my top rating, that is the procedures and what needs to be done to make sure we could simplify them as much as possible. Therefore, I don't know, the rest, I mean, financing and implementation, the project solutions, this is all possible. The expertise is enough, but to go through the procedures, which are not really meant to give quick results, that's the main difficulty. Thank you so much, Anton. Basically, on the one hand, we're hearing about the very active liberalization of the regulation. On the other hand, very often this liberalization, when it comes to the implementation in different places, it's understandable that it's implemented and treated differently. Thank you so much, Anton. And the next speaker, please could you stay with us, and I will appreciate for your questions in the chat. So the next speaker is Vitaly Shumer, the commercial director of the energy company Ukraine.
Mr. Vitali, we already talked about the aggregator to increase the efficiency of the work of the energy system, and also he talked about how important it is so that we could further use this energy system longer term. Can you tell us to what extent this aggregation level is popular in Ukraine now? What is the speed of its development compared with Western countries? And can you maybe comment on or add something to what has already been mentioned today about the needs in such aggregators, both midterm and longer term? Thank you, Elena. Thank you, colleagues, for this wonderful overview and presentations. Some things are in line with our position. I would like to clarify some of other things briefly, but to focus on those things. I really like the presentation of Mr. Srihi. He very clearly mentioned that the development of operators now is extremely important, but let's look at that honestly. Europe built aggregation it took Europe 15 years to build aggregation. It's gigawatts, hundreds of gigawatts in aggregation. In Ukraine, they built it based on the existing generation with the aim to decentralize energy that they did. In Ukraine, the situation is different. Aggregation as such is young, a young notion, young word. Regulation is non-existent, basically. Most market participants have not understood it in the 3 years, what it is like, and there's often, like confusion about that. Because if we look at who works from the participants of the distributed generation who works at the balancing market, we'll see that it's 5 to 7 facilities maximum. Most work in the baseload scenario. They are waiting for the end price. They plan the schedule of work for tomorrow, and they work in the hours where it's presupposed. No work with balancing market, no connection with balancing market. This is the main problem in this regard because most operators today they do not provide services of operators of aggregation groups. They do not participate in balancing market. Of course, there's problems with liquidity and the payments, but that's a second question, basically. Today, we don't even have access to the service in the participation in the balancing market as such. Everybody is working on RDN and to balance the balancing group if they have it. There's no connection with the balancing generation at all. This is just base load. And when we admit that, we can move further because despite there being requirements that say that any of them should participate in the balancing market, it's not done by anyone. In Ukraine, in the last 18 months, there's a lot of conditionally maneuverable generation, but it's not working as such. If we talk about the question of that there's no payments, that there are debts on the balancing market, yes, there are debts for 14 months, and unfortunately, in 3 years, there's been no products that could, for example, as payment immediately, on the on. So I think there could be a synergy between the banking sphere, Ukrenergo, and market participants to build this product, because this, in our opinion, is the main stimulus why distributed generation is not being developed. Until we solve this question, we cannot move further. Because today, for 18 months to 2 years, we've been living in the security sphere. We are building everywhere, anything, because we understand that we don't want to stay without electricity in winters. Then we built it. PSO was livid. PSO was returned. So investor doesn't understand what they should do in that situation. And there's no question, there's no answer to these questions until we make this work in the balancing market, because this is where you have additionally 25 to 30% of economy to the total economy of these facilities. That's why we support the development of aggregated groups in general. We believe that this is the only tool for maneuverable generation to work, because most investors and owners of distributed generation, they don't understand how to work in BR. Yes, everybody's looking at a very simple model. They saw a RDN, they have a chart, they work for 3 hours in the peak period. That's it. Full stop. What happens at night? Are there any orders? What is the activation price? Nobody looks at that. That is the problem. We can't develop further until we regulate this question on the regulatory level, first of all, and until we solve the problem of the economy. Once these two pillars could be solved, I think that then we will grow really quickly. And in a few years, we will be able to replace this destroyed heat generation, where we basically need several gigawatts in the morning and in the evening peak. Today, there's sufficient information, and it's just not working, because mostly it either works, in emergency regime or island regime or basic regime. This is inefficient. Only aggregator can build it up. This is our very, very brief message, because no public utility service. We have seen dozens of these companies. They don't even understand what balancing market is and how to work there. So to wrap up, my brief message is to solve the question of maneuverable generation. We need, first of all, to solve the question of to stimulate distributed generation to work in the balancing market, and then only then will we have efficient maneuverable generation. Thank you. Thank you so much. It also sounds as one of the tasks to develop additional tools for such stimulus, what you mentioned about banks and maybe other participants. So it sounds as an additional task for our government and for the regulator. The next speaker, Andrei Konchenkov, head of the Wind Energy Association. Mr. Andrei, I know that your association is not working with wind energy only, but they also started working with accumulation systems, power accumulation systems. And if we talk about this segment, what are the problems? What are some obstacles? What should be done to speed up having these accumulation systems and facilities in Ukraine? Or what you mentioned, what was mentioned today, this liberalization, regulation, they work more or less in line, and we can move over with that. Again, I would be grateful to you if it was a quick presentation from your side. Thank you, Elena. I would like to say that I do not agree with all of the speakers, especially Mr. Chikalo. We have the National Energy Climate Plan. Today we are discussing the updated energy strategy. So there's a lot of documents that could regulate the future development of the energy. As regards wind, I would like to mention here that since the beginning of the war, as of the first quarter of this year, there was 703 megawatts of wind power plants. So it says that wind and energy, despite the war, continues to be built. Moreover, we control and we know from service of our companies how much is going to be built by the end of this year, which projects are being built, what contracts are. The situation in solar energy is different, and there I agree with Mr. Shakalov fully, because it's a little bit difficult to calculate there how solar energy develops now, when there are some positive things now and there are also some negative things. If we talk about negative things, so here there's constant changes to regulatory policy. If, for example, Naku or somebody else makes something, then and there are changes there. So we have a problem regarding off-takers who can buy electricity for longer periods of time, specifically about green energy.
But as a positive thing, the changes that were started by the Cabinet of Ministers regarding auctions and 700 megawatts for this year is going to be the auction, and this is this offtake that is now we are now lacking in Ukraine. The second question is military risks. Again, the ramp up program is starting now that can partially solve this problem for some of them, but at the same time it should be a stable state support if we need to develop decentralized generation. Again, I fully agree that in the Soviet times there was a big decentralized system, and just to break it, take into account a lot of nuclear generation is impossible. So that's why it's a gradual process. From Ukrenergo, there should be more courageous decisions, and we need to move with that. But it's a question of time. But I'd like to say that wind energy is the most transparent technology. And we can't just, build a wind power plant until you get all the necessary research and stuff. The main thing that you will need to get to connected to the network. That's why we see quite a significant development of this sector now. And since last year, our association created the committees and started developing this. But I'd like to say that today, not all companies that build wind power plants, not all of them are ready to develop together with the systems of energy storage. So what we have there is the question of economy, the questions of the first project, to what extent they're going to show their efficiency. But regarding solar energy, again, changes in the green auctions, it's a very positive signal to be able to get to the auctions and to involve them with that. But that's something that we're just starting to work with. But in the last year, according to our statistics, we had 512 megawatts, specifically of UZ, and this is a great indicator. And today I read, for example, news about Poland. They plan to have 600 plus megawatts for 2027, but not all banks are ready to finance it. Here, it's a little bit more difficult here, this process, but again, we're moving quite fast compared with the EU countries that have a lot more opportunities to finance that. So as conclusion, I would like to say that the changes are happening, not as fast as we would like them to happen, but I think that renewables are currently the fastest, the thing that could help faster in the energy sector, much faster than, well, I don't know much about the gas subject. Mm, but if we take, for example, other technology on fossil fuel technology, I think this is not a perspective of today. We can't solve the question quickly of construction of new power plants or use of imported oil, etc. So that's why it would be good to if the government wouldn't change the rules of the game and things would be stable, and so that all the regulation that are considered today take into account, of course, the debts. Thank you to the regulator for supporting this initiatives and a lot of other questions that currently being solved by our association, by our partners to make sure we could regulate the situation, speed up the development of renewables. Thank you. Thank you so much, Andrei. Dear colleagues, the discussion is very dynamic, but we have run out of time. I would really like to continue. Unfortunately, we cannot uh, keep our speakers and our participants longer. So from my side, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to our panelists because they managed, first of all, to very briefly and very thoroughly to share the proposals, the commentaries. We'll try to systematize all of them and to add to our materials so that these recommendations, these proposals would not be lost, and we would continue discussing them further with the government. But before we finish, I'd like to give the floor to Mihailo, because there were questions in the chat to Mihailo, and Mihailo heard the whole presentation on discussion. Mihailo, over to you. 2-3 minutes for the conclusions. And maybe you could answer the questions also that you could have seen in the chat. Over to you, Mihailo. Thank you. Thank you for the questions. I tried to answer them as much as possible. People wanted more details. So first, I would really recommend that you look at our website and to look at all the documents that were mentioned today, because this was just an excerpt. And there you can find information on electricity, on power, and all the formula. If you need more detail, you could always ask me after the event, and we could work on that in more detail. I saw the questions also whether in our outlooks we have specific details regarding cities and regions. Unfortunately, we made outlooks more for the system in general, because for higher digitalization, we need more resources. And of course, would need to work at the available materials that are not always available in open access. So we are open to any future communication, and I will be glad to answer any questions that you may have. And once again, look at our website and the documents we have already published. Thank you. Thank you so much. Dear colleagues, we cannot keep you waiting, but we are really grateful to you, to the speakers, to the participants. More than 160 people are still with us in our virtual meeting room. It means that the subject is really important. The questions are really important. And we will definitely continue not just discussing them, but also, as much we can as an analytical center, also advocate for them, and also talk about to tell other stakeholders about them. Taking this opportunity, since Mr. Andriy Konichenkov mentioned our climate and energy and climate plan, I'd like to announce that the government is planning to update this plan. So please follow up on the target indicators that Ukraine will define until 2030. And with pleasure, we will be glad to have another discussion like this and more outlooks closer to the autumn. In the meantime, thank you again. We keep working. Let's hope we have a safe summer. Hopefully, it's not going to be too hot so that we don't have too much consumption. And see you next time. Thank you. Thank you all, and see you next time. Bye.